Have you ever placed your rosary beside your pillow at night only to wake finding it tangled in your sheets or fallen to the floor? Perhaps you've held those sacred beads as you drifted to sleep, hoping for some divine protection through the darkness. These small devotional acts might seem simple enough, but beneath them lies a profound spiritual tradition with roots that extend deep into the heart of Catholic mysticism. What if I told you that this seemingly modest practice of keeping a rosary close during your sleep was actually a gateway to transforming your interior life? That in those quiet, vulnerable hours of rest, you might be opening yourself to a divine encounter that Saint Ignatius of Loyola understood as essential to authentic spiritual growth. The truth is that our relationship with sacred objects like the rosary reveals something much deeper about our faith journey and spiritual imagination than we often realize. When we think about our faith practices, how often do we consider what happens in that liminal space between consciousness and sleep? We dedicate time to structured prayers, attend Mass, and perhaps engage in devotional practices throughout our day. But the night hours often remain untouched by intentional spirituality. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the 16th century soldier turned mystic who founded the Society of Jesus, understood that authentic spirituality permeates every dimension of human existence, including our sleep. His own conversion began during a period of extended convalescence where the boundary between wakefulness and sleep became a sacred threshold for divine revelation. For Ignatius, sleep was not merely a biological necessity, but a spiritual opportunity, a time when our defenses are lowered and our souls might become particularly receptive to God's movements. The practice of sleeping with the rosary, which has become common among many devoted Catholics, represents something far more significant than mere superstition or comfort-seeking. When understood through an Ignatian lens, this practice becomes an extension of what Ignatius called the application of senses. In prayer, a way of engaging our entire being, including our physical senses, in relationship with the divine. The rosary itself, composed of beads representing prayers and contemplations on the mysteries of Christ's life, serves as what Ignatius might have termed a compositio loci, or a setting of place, a physical anchor that helps orient our imagination towards sacred realities, even as we drift into unconsciousness. Many Americans today view sleep primarily through the lens of productivity. How well did I sleep? Am I getting enough hours to function effectively tomorrow? We seldom consider sleep as sacred time, as a period of spiritual vulnerability and potential. Yet for centuries, monastic traditions have recognized the spiritual significance of these hours. The ancient practice of compline, the final prayer of the day before sleep, included petitions for divine protection during the night, precisely because sleep was understood as a time of both vulnerability and spiritual possibility. In keeping the rosary close during sleep, we participate in this ancient wisdom, acknowledging that our spiritual journey continues even when our conscious mind rests. The skeptic might dismiss this practice as mere superstition, a kind of spiritual security blanket. After all, what meaningful difference could the proximity of blessed beads make to our sleeping souls? This perspective misunderstands the sacramental imagination at the heart of Catholic spirituality. In the Catholic tradition, physical objects can become vehicles of grace not through some magical property, but through their capacity to orient our hearts and minds toward God. When we place the rosary beside us, or hold it as we sleep, we are making a statement of intention, setting our final thoughts toward prayer, and entrusting ourselves to divine care as we enter the vulnerability of sleep. Let me ask you a question that might touch something deep within your heart. Have you ever noticed how your last thoughts before sleep seem to color your dreams and even your disposition upon waking? There's something uniquely influential about that threshold between wakefulness and sleep. The practice of holding the rosary as you drift into sleep can serve as a powerful means of directing your final conscious thoughts toward the divine mysteries. This is not about earning grace through pious actions, but about orienting your entire being toward receptivity to God's already abundant grace. I want to connect with you more personally for a moment. Have you ever experienced periods of spiritual dryness when prayer feels mechanical or God seems distant? Ignatius himself experienced these periods of desolation and developed spiritual practices to navigate them. The physical connection to the rosary during sleep can serve as an anchor during such times, a tangible reminder of faith when emotional connection feels absent. If this resonates with your experience, I invite you to share in the comments with the words, "I seek deeper connection." Your willingness to acknowledge this common spiritual struggle might help someone else feel less alone in their journey. Sometimes the most powerful ministry happens when we simply share our authentic spiritual experiences with one another, creating space for others to recognize their own journey in our words. What Ignatius understood perhaps more profoundly than many spiritual teachers before him was the psychological dimension of faith. His spiritual exercises demonstrate remarkable insight into human psychology, centuries before the development of modern psychological sciences. In recognizing the power of what we now might call the subconscious mind, Ignatius developed spiritual practices that work with rather than against our psychological nature. The practice of sleeping with the rosary engages this psychological wisdom, acknowledging that the images and thoughts we carry into sleep can influence our spiritual formation in subtle but significant ways. The rosary itself represents what Ignatius would recognize as a form of contemplation on the mysteries of faith. Each decade of the rosary corresponds to events in the lives of Jesus and Mary, inviting meditation on these sacred stories. When we fall asleep with the rosary nearby or in hand, we are symbolically carrying these mysteries into our unconscious mind, allowing them to penetrate beyond our rational defenses. Modern psychology has confirmed what Ignatius seemed to intuit, that our minds continue processing and integrating information during sleep. By intentionally bringing sacred symbols and thoughts into this space, we invite spiritual formation to continue even as we rest. This practice aligns perfectly with one of the central insights of Ignatian spirituality, the invitation to find God in all things. For Ignatius, there was no fundamental separation between sacred and secular ordinary life and spiritual life. Every moment, every space, every activity could become an encounter with the divine. By extending our spiritual practice into sleep, we remove one more artificial boundary between our spiritual life and our regular life, acknowledging that even in sleep, we remain beloved creatures in relationship with our Creator. Consider how countercultural this approach to sleep becomes in our modern context. In a world that increasingly views sleep as merely utilitarian, the restorative downtime necessary for productive waking hours, the Ignatian approach invites us to reclaim sleep as sacred time. Rather than seeing sleep as an interruption to spiritual practice, we might begin to recognize it as an integral part of our spiritual journey. The rosary beside our pillow serves as a physical reminder of this spiritual continuity, challenging the compartmentalization that often characterizes modern religious practice. The biographical details of Saint Ignatius offer us profound insight into why sleep might have held such spiritual significance in his understanding. After being severely wounded in battle at Pamplona, Ignatius underwent a lengthy convalescence during which he experienced vivid dreams and visions that proved pivotal to his conversion. It was during this period of enforced rest that Ignatius began to discern what he called different spirits that moved his soul, noting that certain thoughts left him feeling empty and restless, while others brought lasting peace. This practice of discernment, which became central to Ignatian spirituality, emerged significantly from his experiences in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. For those unfamiliar with Ignatian spirituality, it's important to understand that his approach was never primarily about rigid rules or practices, but about developing an attentiveness to the movements of God in every aspect of life. The practice of sleeping with the rosary should be understood not as an obligation, but as an invitation, an opportunity to extend that attentiveness into the night hours. What matters is not the external action alone, but the interior disposition, the openness to allowing God to work even in our sleep. This reflects the Ignatian principle that the external form of a devotion matters less than the authentic movement toward God that it facilitates. Let's examine more closely how this practice relates to the Ignatian method of prayer, particularly the application of senses. In his spiritual exercises, Ignatius invites the retreatant to engage all their senses in contemplating the gospel scenes, to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch the reality of the sacred mysteries. The physical dimension of the rosary, the feeling of beads between fingers, serves as a tactile anchor for this sensory engagement with faith. As we fall asleep holding the rosary, our sense of touch provides a continuing connection to prayer, even as other senses diminish in the approach to sleep. This physical connection can help maintain spiritual focus during that critical transition from wakefulness to sleep. The tradition of sleeping with sacred objects extends far beyond Catholic practice, of course. Many religious traditions recognize the spiritual significance of sleep and employ various practices to sanctify these hours. What distinguishes the Ignatian approach is its integration with a broader spirituality of discernment and attentiveness. The rosary beside the pillow becomes not merely a protective talisman, but a tool for continuing the practice of attentiveness to God's presence and movement, even as conscious awareness fades. This transforms what might otherwise be merely superstitious into a practice with authentic spiritual depth. Another significant aspect of Ignatian spirituality that illuminates this practice is the concept of consolation and desolation. Ignatius observed that certain thoughts and experiences draw us toward God, bringing a sense of peace, joy, and increased faith, while others lead away from God, generating anxiety, restlessness, or despair. The hours before sleep can be particularly vulnerable to thoughts that lead toward desolation, as fatigue lowers our psychological defenses. The practice of holding the rosary while falling asleep can serve as a physical reminder to notice these movements and to orient ourselves toward thoughts that bring genuine consolation. One of the most beautiful dimensions of the Ignatian approach to spirituality is its profound respect for individual differences. Ignatius recognized that God works uniquely in each person's life, and that spiritual practices must be adapted to individual temperaments and circumstances. This principle applies equally to the practice of sleeping with the rosary. For some individuals, this practice might become a deeply meaningful part of their spiritual routine, while others might find different practices more helpful for sanctifying their sleep. The Ignatian approach invites discernment rather than uniform prescription, recognizing the personal nature of each person's relationship with God. We live in an age increasingly characterized by sleep disruption. Studies consistently show rising rates of insomnia and sleep disorders, often connected to the stresses and technological intrusions of contemporary life. Many Americans reach for pharmaceutical solutions or follow elaborate sleep hygiene protocols, seeking that elusive good night's rest. The Ignatian tradition offers a complementary perspective, suggesting that some sleep difficulties might have a spiritual dimension. The practice of bringing the rosary to bed, acknowledging God's presence in the night hours, and surrendering our anxieties through prayer might address aspects of sleeplessness that purely physiological approaches miss. Saint Ignatius developed his spirituality during a time when the boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness was understood differently than it is today. In the pre-modern world, dreams were often accorded spiritual significance, and the transition to sleep was recognized as a liminal space with unique spiritual qualities. While we need not adopt all pre-modern understandings of sleep, modern neuroscience has in many ways confirmed the special nature of the hypnagogic state, the transition period between wakefulness and sleep. During this state, the mind becomes particularly receptive to imagery and suggestion. The practice of holding the rosary during this transition time can help direct this receptivity towards sacred rather than mundane concerns. The full significance of sleeping with the rosary becomes clearer when we consider it in light of the Ignatian understanding of the examination of consciousness, or examen prayer. This practice, which Ignatius considered non-negotiable even when other prayers needed to be omitted, involves reflecting on the day that has passed, noticing God's presence and absence, confessing failings, and looking forward to the day to come. When the examen is performed before sleep as traditionally practiced, it forms a natural prelude to taking up the rosary. The physical beads become a tangible continuation of this reflective prayer, carrying its intention into sleep itself. Let us consider, too, how this practice might relate to the Ignatian concept of indifference, which is frequently misunderstood. By indifference, Ignatius did not mean apathy or lack of concern, but rather a spiritual freedom that allows one to embrace whatever circumstances God might allow in one's life. Sleep represents perhaps the ultimate practice of Ignatian indifference, as we surrender control and entrust ourselves to God's care. The rosary held in sleep becomes a symbol of this surrender, a physical enactment of placing ourselves in God's hands as we enter the vulnerability of unconsciousness. One aspect of this practice that resonates strongly with contemporary American spirituality is its embodied nature. There has been a growing recognition, even among Protestant and non-denominational Christians, of the importance of engaging the body in spiritual practice, countering centuries of excessive emphasis on purely intellectual or verbal dimensions of faith. The tactile, physical nature of the rosary addresses this need for embodied spirituality, providing a tangible connection to prayer that engages our physical senses. In sleep, when the mind's verbal capacities diminish, this physical connection can maintain spiritual continuity in a primarily nonverbal way. It's worth noting that Ignatius himself recognized the potential dangers of overly scrupulous attention to external practices. Throughout his writings, he emphasizes that external forms and methods are meant to facilitate an authentic encounter with God, not to become ends in themselves. This wisdom applies equally to the practice of sleeping with the rosary. The value lies not in the external act itself, which could indeed become merely superstitious. but in the interior movement toward God that the practice facilitates. For some individuals, in some circumstances, other practices might better serve this purpose, highlighting again the importance of personal discernment in Ignatian spirituality. The practice of sleeping with the rosary also connects to the Ignatian emphasis on the Incarnation, the belief that God entered fully into human experience through Jesus Christ. By sanctifying sleep through the presence of the rosary, we acknowledge that even this most basic human function can be a site of encounter with the divine. There is no aspect of human experience, including unconsciousness, that stands outside the realm of God's grace. This incarnational spirituality counters dualistic tendencies that would separate spiritual life from bodily experience, recognizing instead their profound interconnection. How might this practice look in the context of a modern American Catholic's life? Perhaps it begins with the night prayer or examen, followed by taking up the rosary as you prepare for sleep. You might pray a decade or simply hold the beads as a physical reminder of your intention to remain open to God even in sleep. As you drift toward unconsciousness, the physical presence of the rosary serves as an anchor for your spiritual attention, a tangible reminder of sacred mysteries. Upon waking, you might acknowledge God's presence through the night, perhaps noticing any dreams or insights that arose during sleep. The practice thus creates a frame around sleep, integrating it into your broader spiritual journey. The tradition of sleeping with the rosary extends beyond individual practice to include family spiritual life as well. In many traditional Catholic families, parents would pray the rosary with their children before bed, establishing a rhythm of family prayer that culminated in this devotion. The beads might remain with the child through the night, serving as a tangible reminder of both divine protection and family spiritual connection. In our contemporary context, when family prayer has become less common, this tradition offers a powerful opportunity for reintegrating shared spiritual practice into family life, addressing the compartmentalization that often characterizes modern religious experience. What might be the fruits of incorporating this practice into your spiritual life? Ignatius always emphasized the importance of noticing the effects of different spiritual practices, discerning their value by their fruits. Those who regularly sleep with the rosary often report a greater sense of peace in falling asleep, fewer anxious or intrusive thoughts during the hypnagogic state, and a more centered beginning to the following day. Some notice an increased awareness of dreams and their spiritual significance, while others experience a more general sense of divine protection through the night. As with all spiritual practices, however, the specific fruits will vary according to individual temperament and God's unique action in each person's life. It's important to address potential misunderstandings about this practice, particularly concerns about superstition. Sleeping with the rosary is not about manipulating divine favor or protection through external actions. Such an approach would contradict the Ignatian emphasis on grace as God's free gift, rather than something earned through pious practices. Rather, the rosary serves as a physical aid to interior disposition, helping to orient heart and mind toward receptivity to the grace God already freely offers. The external action facilitates, but never replaces the interior movement toward God that remains the essence of authentic spirituality. One particularly beautiful aspect of this practice is how it can evolve over a lifetime of faith. A child might begin by sleeping with the rosary as a simple comfort, or out of family tradition. As spiritual understanding deepens, the same practice takes on richer meaning, becoming a more conscious act of surrender and receptivity. In times of spiritual consolation, the rosary might serve as an expression of devotional love, while during periods of desolation, it provides a physical anchor when emotional connection feels absent. The external practice remains consistent, while its interior significance evolves through different seasons of spiritual life. If these reflections on the spiritual significance of sleeping with the rosary have resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where we explore the riches of Catholic spiritual tradition through the lens of saints like Ignatius of Loyola. Each week, we examine practices and teachings that can deepen your faith journey, helping you discover the presence of God in every aspect of life. You're not alone in seeking a more authentic and integrated spirituality. Many of us hunger for traditions that engage our full humanity, including those dimensions often overlooked in contemporary religious practice. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. Your presence here is itself a sign of the Spirit's movement in your life. As we consider implementing this practice, it's worth reflecting on how it might complement other elements of Ignatian spirituality. For instance, the practice of sleeping with the rosary pairs naturally with the Ignatian approach to contemplative prayer, particularly imaginative engagement with Scripture. During evening prayer, you might contemplate one of the mysteries of the rosary, perhaps the agony in the garden with its themes of surrender and trust. As you fall asleep holding the rosary, the physical beads serve as a continuing connection to that contemplation, allowing the spiritual insights to permeate more deeply as you drift into sleep. This creates a beautiful continuity between formal prayer and rest. The rosary itself embodies a principle central to Ignatian spirituality, the integration of structure and freedom. The rosary provides a clear structure through its sequence of prayers and mysteries, yet within that structure, there remains significant freedom for personal adaptation and expression. Similarly, Ignatius provided clear methods and structures for prayer, while emphasizing the importance of flexibility and adaptation to individual circumstances. The practice of sleeping with the rosary reflects this same balance. We follow a traditional form while remaining free to adapt it to our personal spiritual needs and circumstances. One of the most profound insights of Ignatian spirituality is the recognition that God speaks to us not only through Scripture and tradition, but also through our own human experience, including our emotions, desires, and even our dreams. By bringing the rosary into the realm of sleep, we create conditions that might help us attend to this divine communication that occurs below the threshold of conscious awareness. Upon waking, we might practice what Ignatius called the awareness exam, noticing any insights or movements that arose during sleep and discerning their spiritual significance. The rosary thus serves as a bridge between conscious prayer and the deeper awareness that can emerge through sleep. For those struggling with anxiety or intrusive thoughts at bedtime, the practice of sleeping with the rosary can be particularly beneficial. Modern psychology recognizes that the time before sleep represents a vulnerable period when worries often intensify and mental defenses weaken. The rosary provides not only a spiritual focus but also a psychological anchor, redirecting attention from anxious rumination toward the sacred mysteries. Many find that physically holding the beads offers a tactile grounding that helps interrupt cycles of anxious thought. This represents a beautiful convergence of psychological wisdom and spiritual practice, both recognizing the need for concrete tools to redirect mental focus. Let's consider how this practice might be particularly relevant in our contemporary cultural context. We live in an age of unprecedented digital distraction, where many Americans report checking their phones as both the last action before sleep and the first upon waking. The blue light and mental stimulation from these devices has been shown to disrupt healthy sleep patterns, while the content consumed often feeds anxiety rather than peace. The practice of replacing phone scrolling with holding the rosary represents a countercultural choice to end and begin the day in sacred rather than digital space. This simple substitution can have profound effects on both spiritual and psychological well-being. It's worth exploring how the Ignatian approach to sleeping with the rosary might differ from other spiritual traditions around sleep. Many New Age approaches, for instance, emphasize techniques like dream journaling or various forms of sleep meditation aimed primarily at self-knowledge or manifestation of desires. The Ignatian approach, while valuing self-knowledge, places it within the larger context of relationship with God. The goal is not merely personal insight but deeper communion with the divine, a subtle but significant difference in orientation. The rosary serves not primarily as a tool for self-improvement, but as a means of remaining in conscious relationship with God, even as consciousness itself diminishes in sleep. We should acknowledge that for some individuals, the practice of sleeping with the rosary might initially feel awkward or artificial. Ignatius recognized that new spiritual practices often require a period of adjustment before they become natural expressions of faith. He encouraged perseverance through this initial awkwardness, allowing time for a practice to reveal its fruits. If you choose to explore sleeping with the rosary, it might be helpful to commit to a trial period, perhaps 2 weeks, during which you maintain the practice consistently. This allows sufficient time to move beyond the initial unfamiliarity and discover whether this practice genuinely nurtures your particular spiritual journey. The integration of sacred objects into sleep reflects a sacramental worldview central to Catholic spirituality, but often underemphasized in contemporary American religious culture. In a sacramental understanding, physical reality can mediate divine presence not as a replacement for direct relationship with God, but as a vehicle for that relationship that honors our embodied nature. The rosary in sleep becomes a sacramental, a blessed object that serves as a channel of grace. This understanding counters both materialistic reduction of physical objects to mere matter and spiritualistic tendencies to discount the importance of tangible expressions of faith. One beautiful dimension of this practice is its accessibility. While many spiritual disciplines require significant time, education, or physical capacity, sleeping with the rosary can be practiced by virtually anyone regardless of age, health status, or theological education. This universality reflects the Catholic understanding that holiness is not reserved for spiritual elites, but is the universal call of all believers. The simplicity of the practice belies its potential depth, illustrating the Ignatian principle that God can be found not only in complex theological reflection, but also in the most basic elements of human experience. As with all devotional practices, it's important to maintain a healthy balance, avoiding either scrupulosity or casualness. Ignatius warned against both extremes, recognizing that excessive concern about performing spiritual practices perfectly can become as problematic as neglecting them altogether. If you forget the rosary one night or find it uncomfortable to hold while sleeping, this need not become a source of spiritual anxiety. What matters is the general orientation toward integrating faith into all dimensions of life, including sleep, not perfect consistency in external forms. This balance reflects the fundamental Ignatian insight that spiritual practices serve human flourishing, rather than humans serving practices. The tradition of sleeping with the rosary connects us with generations of Catholics who have practiced this devotion before us. In an age often characterized by historical amnesia and the constant pursuit of novelty, this connection with tradition offers a profound sense of continuity and belonging. When you hold the rosary and sleep, you join countless believers across centuries who have found in this simple practice a means of expressing and deepening their faith. This sense of connection with the communion of saints represents a powerful antidote to the isolation that often characterizes contemporary spiritual life. For parents seeking to nurture faith in their children, the practice of sleeping with the rosary offers a tangible way to introduce important spiritual concepts. Children naturally connect with physical objects and often find comfort in bedtime routines. Introducing the rosary as part of this routine, accompanied by age-appropriate explanations, can help children begin to understand concepts like divine protection, sacred presence, and the communion of saints. As children mature, the same practice can evolve in meaning, becoming a vehicle for more sophisticated theological understanding, while maintaining the emotional security established in childhood. Let's return to the Ignatian concept of finding God in all things to understand more deeply how this practice aligns with Ignatius's core spiritual insights. For Ignatius, the spiritual journey involved increasingly recognizing divine presence and action in every dimension of experience, from the explicitly religious to the seemingly mundane. Sleep occupies nearly a third of human life, yet often remains unintegrated into conscious spiritual practice. By bringing the rosary into sleep, we acknowledge that even this universal human experience can become a site of encounter with God. This represents not an addition to Ignatian spirituality, but an application of its fundamental principle, extending the search for God into a previously neglected dimension of experience. Critics might question whether the unconscious state of sleep can have any genuine spiritual significance. After all, how can we engage in relationship with God when we lack conscious awareness? The Ignatian response would emphasize that divine action extends beyond human consciousness, that God continues to work in us, even when we are unaware. The practice of sleeping with the rosary represents an acknowledgement of this continued divine action, an act of trust that surrenders to God's work even in unconsciousness. This trust reflects the fundamental disposition of Ignatian spirituality, an openness to God's presence and action in all circumstances, whether or not we consciously perceive it. The concept of intention holds particular importance in understanding this practice. Ignatius emphasized that the interior intention behind an action often matters more than its external form. When we intentionally take up the rosary before sleep, we establish a direction for our unconscious mind, setting our interior compass toward God, even as conscious control diminishes. This illustrates the Ignatian principle that spiritual growth involves not only conscious choices, but also the gradual reorientation of our deeper inclinations. The rosary in sleep serves as both symbol and instrument of this reorientation, helping align our unconscious tendencies with our conscious spiritual aims. As we prepare to conclude this exploration of sleeping with the rosary through the lens of Ignatian spirituality, it's worth synthesizing the key insights we've discovered. We've seen how this simple practice embodies fundamental principles of Ignatian spirituality. the integration of physical and spiritual dimensions of life, the extension of divine encounter into all aspects of experience, the balance of structure and freedom in devotional practice, and the recognition that God works in us, even beyond our conscious awareness. We've considered how the practice can evolve through different life stages and spiritual seasons addressing different needs while maintaining continuity of form. And we've reflected on its countercultural significance in our digital age, offering an alternative to beginning and ending the day, immersed in distraction. What might Saint Ignatius himself say to those considering this practice? Based on his writings, we might imagine him offering 3 pieces of guidance. First, he would likely emphasize discernment, encouraging each person to notice whether this practice genuinely facilitates deeper relationship with God in their particular circumstances. Second, he would counsel patience, recognizing that spiritual practices often reveal their fruits gradually, rather than immediately. Finally, he would remind us that the external form remains secondary to the interior movement toward God. The rosary serves as means, rather than end. This balanced approach, reflecting Ignatius's profound spiritual wisdom, offers guidance not only for this specific practice, but for the spiritual journey as a whole. I want to leave you with a final thought that captures the essence of what we've explored together. Sleep represents one of the most universal yet mysterious dimensions of human experience, a daily surrender of consciousness that reminds us of our fundamental vulnerability and dependence. When we bring the rosary into this experience, we acknowledge that even in our most vulnerable state, we remain held in divine love, that God's care for us continues uninterrupted whether or not we maintain conscious awareness of it. Perhaps in this lies the deepest significance of sleeping with the rosary, not as a magical protection, but as a profound act of trust, a physical expression of the soul's willingness to rest in God, even when consciousness itself fades away. In that surrender, we discover paradoxically our deepest security. If this exploration of Ignatian spirituality and the practice of sleeping with the rosary has spoken to your heart, I invite you to join our community by subscribing to this channel. Each week we delve into spiritual practices that can transform your relationship with God, drawing on the rich wisdom of Catholic tradition while addressing the unique challenges of contemporary life. You'll find resources for deepening your prayer life, integrating faith into everyday experience, and finding God truly in all things. You're not alone on this spiritual journey. Many others walk this path alongside you, seeking authentic faith in a complex world. I'm grateful for your presence here today and look forward to continuing this exploration of sacred tradition together.